Good evening, everyone. I'm Francis. This is Jake. I'm the writer. Jake is the photographer. And I just want to say at the outset that this is really more Jake's book than mine. You can tell that very readily because his name is bigger than mine on the spine of the book. It's, I think, roughly 4 times the size of mine. And in fact, with a book such as this, that's exactly how it should be. Jake is, in my opinion, one of the great architectural and cityscape photographers of our time. And that's why when the publisher, Antique Collectors Club, and do let me say that that may at first sound a little weird. What is Antique Collectors Club doing a book about New York buildings for? It is a publisher based in England that originally did do books for antique collectors, you know, sort of guides to antiques, but sort of grew from there. I think they call themselves ACC now in order to sort of get a little bit beyond that word antique. And they do a lot of really, really nice books. And I had known their books for many years, and then they called me up and said, you know, we're doing this book with Jake of photographs of prominent buildings and locations around New York City, and we need somebody to do the text. Would you be willing to do it? I said, first of all, how much are you paying? And then I said, yes, I've been very eager to do something with Jake over the years. We've never collaborated before, but I've been an admirer, a big admirer of his work for 25 years or so. And so it was, you know, a great thing to be asked to do. But then I also said, listen, you know, Jake's work is going to be fabulous no matter what. You're conceiving of this, Mr. Publisher, you're conceiving of this book as a kind of gifty tourist trade book, you know, the kind of thing that, you know, is going to be on the front table of the bookstore for, you know, people to buy as a memento of New York. It's a very particular genre of book. You're all familiar with it. Well, I said, okay, it's fine that it's going to be that kind of book, but since it's going to have great photographs, why don't we also try to give it a text that is maybe a cut above the text that you normally find in such a book? That'll make it a much more interesting project for me to work on, and it's not going to take away sales to the tourist trade, but it may also appeal to other people. And so that's the book that Jake and I hope we've produced. Something which, in spite of maybe initial appearances, is actually a cut above what this sort of book normally is. The other thing that I want to say about the book is that this was a publisher's decision. And I'm not dissing the publisher in any way. New York City Landmarks. It's might be a little bit misleading for a book in this year, because this is the year of the 50th anniversary of the Landmarks Law in New York. That phrase, New York City Landmarks, is sort of being used everywhere, and it has a very specific meaning. It means buildings designated as landmarks by the New York City Landmarks Preservation Commission. This book is not limited to buildings that are designated as landmarks. It includes a lot of other things. The Skyscraper Museum, where we are right now, is an entry in this book. It's not a designated landmark, but it is nonetheless something worthy of inclusion in a book like this. Anyway, that's the title. I don't want you to think that it has anything to do with the Landmarks Law. And I think what I will do now is turn things over to Jake. He'll talk to you a little bit about his career, his photographs, and then our hope is that we'll sort of figure this out as we go along.
Well, thank you for coming here. It's a pleasure to be in front of you. And you know, Francis Morrone did a great job. I think he added a lot of wit, humor, besides historical context to each landmark. My journey in New York started many, many years ago. Like the person said before, I came from Poland. I ended up arriving by ship here in New York Harbor. And my first sight into New York City was on a boat at nighttime. Everybody was looking at the Statue of Liberty. We were coming from Israel. People were crying. The next day I got up early and went outside and saw these skyscrapers. The light came out, hit the skyscrapers, and they were all golden. And since that time, New York has had a magical fascination for me. So as a young man, I first got to New York, I started photographing New York. I probably now photographed probably about 1 million photographs of the city. So part of doing a book or any project, photography especially, is condensing what you have photographed and choosing what is your favorite thing. So photography is really a lot of art's really a process of rejection. So eliminating what is unnecessary. We chose this as a cover because it has a couple of historical buildings, and it also has two of the newest structures that were created in the last decade. I feel personally, in New York, the tragedy of 9/11 also somehow woke New York up to how important our architecture is. And so New York kind of went through an explosion of building, beautiful buildings with the best architects in the world came here and designed some fabulous buildings. The New York skyline in New York City is almost not the same city it was 20 years ago. So we try to capture that flavor in this book, plus the whole, so how it's transitioning from a manufacturing city to more of a creative city. Creativity is now driving the engine of this city. You can see that in architecture. And with creativity comes this concept of lifestyle, how people enjoy themselves. Creative people like to have fun. The city's become even more fun in terms of, for the city, the people that live here. And this was almost a reflection of what I saw when I came to New York the first time I came to the city. I always try to find an angle that's different. So this is all the way from Bayonne with long lenses. So it gives you, it's one photograph, it's not digitally manipulated, but it gives you, the symmetrical, it's like you're capturing two different periods of time. That's it.
Can't do that with your iPhone.
One day, not yet. And I get up earlier. You always thought you're pursuing the light. What happens with the light is kind of very important in photography. So you're trying to be at the right time at the right place. And when I photograph New York City, especially, the light changes all year round. So the light hitting the Empire State Building, this particular angle, maybe happens 2 days out of the year. So I'm always planning a year ahead for what photograph I'm going to take next.
It's interesting that the last photograph, 20 years ago, as Jake said, could you go back to the last photograph? You have two buildings right there that sort of dominate the scene. The new One World Trade Center on the left and 8 Spruce Street on the right, which is the Frank Gehry apartment building, tallest building that Frank Gehry ever designed. Those weren't there. 20 years ago, of course, in this image, you would have seen the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center together with the Brooklyn Bridge and the Woolworth Building, if you could go forward. And yet here's a picture that would have looked identical 20 years ago. I mean, maybe not in terms of the photographic technology, but the sort of the image, everything that you see in this, there's nothing in it that's new at all. So New York is a city that kind of, it can go both ways. It depends on the angle that you're looking at it. When I take people on walking tours, sometimes I make them stand in a certain position and look in a certain direction so that they see only things that were there 50 years ago. It's still possible to do that in New York, but for how much longer, we don't know.
This is just, what I do sometimes for photography technique, I stitch photographs together. So there's like 5 different shots put together, so you get the whole sense of the whole New York skyline from New Jersey through Brooklyn. Again, I get drawn to New York Harbor, I think, because of my early time arriving to the city. This is the Verrazano Bridge through the Marathon. It's the one nice thing about being a photographer, you get to sometimes get very unique angles, very unique access.
Where were you?
I'm on top of one of the piers, one of the pillars looking down.
How did you get up there?
Well, this place has an elevator. A lot of places climb actually the column, the cables is how you get up. Certain places, certain bridges I climb, you climb up the cables. Here they have an elevator actually.
Did you need permission?
Yes.
They
You always need
an elevator.
They have an elevator that takes you up to
In the Verrazano Bridge?
Yeah.
And both towers?
I don't know, the one tower, I think probably both. And this is the Skyscraper Museum. I mean, first time I came here, I loved the way the light reflected, the design, the way all the angles and the way the light reflected off of all the surfaces here was really special. Say. Well, for me, the first picture I ever saw was a picture of the Twin Towers. After, the Twin Towers fell, were destroyed, I almost didn't photograph New York for about 7, 8 years because it's kind of, just every time I look at the skyline, there's like a hole missing in the sky. So, and then eventually, as 8 or 9 years went by, I photographed. This is one of the most moving memorials I've ever seen. Again, this shows how New York kind of transforms itself, moves forward. But this, with the water, I don't know if anybody's been there. It's so powerful. It takes your breath away. Really. It couldn't have been done, better. Anyone make a comment? Again, this is the museum. Has anybody been there?
Yes, sure.
It's
Not to the museum, but to the water is incredible.
Yeah, the memorial is especially really nice at night.
Yeah.
I think they close it too early. They close it at 9 o'clock. They don't let you get right up to it after 9. But if you can get there after dark, before they close it, it's at its best, I think.
And then this is the interior of the museum. It's very wide open. It's also very moving. It's just, again, it takes your breath away. It's a very melancholy. It's very powerful. There's huge open spaces. They kept the footprint of the Twin Towers, and
Are those pillars part of
those are the original pillars from the towers. This is, well, again, this is historical
The New York Stock Exchange.
For a long time, they had a flag covering the front of it.
Yeah, and it looks so much better without.
A flag. Again,
Those statues are spectacular at the top. More so in this photograph than when you're on the street looking at it.
Yeah, it's true, more so in the photograph than on the street. Actually, it's not the original sculpture in the pediment. It was redone, and it was really very clumsily done. The modeling of the figures is very poor. So although it's absolutely correct in a building like this to have figure sculpture filling up the triangular space, the pediment like that, unfortunately, this is not a really good example of that. The appellate courthouse on 25th Street is much better.
What do they depict, the figures?
Just, just making money. I figure, it's you got your goddess of gold coins and Probably something referring to wheat.
And it's the Trinity Church, so again, I love the way that, this is again only happens like a half hour during the day where the sun's actually just almost like 15 minutes where the sun is just coming straight down. So it illuminates just the church. So I'm always, like I said, searching the light, following the light to get the right shot. Again, this is the different old and new.
That's beautiful.
Do you remember how after 9/11, for a while, the Woolworth building was once again the absolutely dominant building on the skyline in Lower Manhattan? Not anymore.
And this is, I guess, we also went to show data. In this book, we kind of focused on the different neighborhoods and kind of it has a historical context. It weren't just, I guess, for us, the landmarks also kind of represented periods of time in the city. And so this is kind of a period of time landmark as opposed to just a historical landmark. Well, one of the things I love to do is the nice down, I don't know if anybody gets a chance, but almost all the bridges you can walk across. And so it's one of the nicest things to do is, walk across the bridge. And so this is me walking at dawn across the bridge and shooting New York City. Nothing more magical than, either watching the sun go down watching the lights either come up or go down in the city, watching transformation from twilight. It's a very, very unique experience in New York, or anywhere else also.
The Verrazano would be the one exception. You
There's
can't
some
walk
bridges you
across
can.
the Verrazano,
Right.
but one day you can run across the Verrazano.
I mean, especially for me, the Brooklyn Bridge, I walk that a lot, and it's, I guess when it first was created historically, it was nobody had ever built a bridge across a river like this, and people when they walked, it's like so monumental experience for people to walk across actually a bridge, which they hadn't done before. Again, we're doing the neighborhoods, transformation. This is in Chinatown. So again, like landmark is also a historical context. So this is a different transformation of different neighborhoods. Is there something about it?
It's Eldridge Street Synagogue, which, as you know, was in recent years magnificently restored after it had simply deteriorated for many, many years. It was actually a walking tour guide who was the first person to stick his head in the sanctuary of this synagogue. Gerard Wolfe, right? Yes, exactly. And sort of that set the whole thing in motion. Eventually, of course, money came into the picture, and he was a little bit marginalized in the whole thing. But the thing is it was a walking tour guide who started the whole thing in motion. That's you don't often get to say that.
Again, this is Cooper Square. This is the old building, Cooper Union, excuse me, and then we juxtapose the new building that was built there. So it's kind of the transformation of the city. Again, a lot of this happened, in the last 10, 15 years. New York seems to have picked up the pace.
Just a quick show of hands. How many of you like this building?
I hate it.
Okay.
I just don't like the locations.
That's fine, yeah. I'm just curious. That's 41 Cooper Square. It's just south of Cooper Union, and actually is part of Cooper Union. And of course, we all know the very sad story about how it was involved in the financial woes that Cooper Union has lately experienced. The architect is Tom Main, who a Los Angeles-based Pritzker Prize winning architect. So this is a part of Manhattan where you have this, and then just a stone's throw from it, the 51 Astor Place by Fumihiko Maki, another Pritzker Prize winner. So just as Jake was saying at the very beginning, New York in recent years, really since 9/11, has become a major showcase of famous world architects, which is interesting because historically New York has not been that. New York has historically had a very insular architectural culture, where New York architects design New York buildings, and for better or for worse, this situation is changing. An architect from Los Angeles like Maine, an architect from Japan like Maki, and so on. Yes?
You probably know the Blue Whale in Los Angeles, which this building reminds me of, and it's still Los Angeles. I've lived there half my life. And the Blue Whale is a monstrosity that was built probably in the 70s, right off Sunset, I think it's Sunset Boulevard. And it's an arts and design building now, but they never knew what to do with it. And it also is just like a blob.
Yeah.
And I know some of you people like this building, but it's just...
The photograph is marvelous, but the
Oh,
building
yeah.
inside doesn't work for its purposes for the students. And so that's why, as far as I'm concerned, it's a failure, but it's a beautiful photograph.
Is it just classrooms inside, or what?
Yeah.
That's all it is?
Classrooms and
offices?
laboratories, stuff like that.
And a gallery.
It's an
Yeah,
engineering.
gallery, right, just all of
engineering
that.
building, right? That's what you said.
Right.
Okay.
Mhm.
Thanks.
And the Maki Tower is on the site of the old engineering building that was torn down.
And this is the Tenement Museum. So again, the contrast we try to do in this book. In terms of the modern architecture, I think it just kind of fits in where, again, we're transitioning into economy that's creativity. So I think I love the modern architecture that's happening here, because I think when I walk the streets, it kind of keeps my mind fresh and excited. It's kind of, I have to look forward to what's in the future as opposed to looking towards the past. That's how New York's really always reinvented itself. So, again, this is the Bowery being transformed to the new museum.
This is by a Japanese firm, Sana, which is very much in the news because that's the same firm that's trying to disfigure the Samaritain store on the Rue de Rivoli in Paris right now. A very, very controversial project. This much less so. In fact, if you're going to build a building that looks like this, the Lower Bowery might be the best place.
It's just, you want to say something about this architecture?
Cast iron architecture, which Soho is known for. It's a funny thing. I not long ago taught a course on New York in the 1970s and 80s, and I was able to sort of like think back to the Soho that I knew when I was young. I was young once, and it was so radically different from the Soho of today. There were still manufacturers in Soho, but the artists had begun to move in. So I never knew Soho before the artists had begun to move in, but I did know Soho around the time that, speaking of the anniversary of the Landmarks Law, that the effort got underway to designate a Soho cast iron historic district, which involved, first and foremost, going around Soho, identifying all the cast iron buildings, cataloging them, and researching them, a project which was spearheaded by a wonderful woman who died only a couple of years ago, by the way, at my age, when I say a couple of years ago, that could mean anywhere between 2 and 20 years ago. Margot Gale, whom I'm sure some of you are familiar with, but when she led her team around Soho that was cataloging the buildings, you all know the story, but I'm going to tell it anyway. A lot of these cast iron buildings were designed very carefully to look as though they were made of stone. Some of them were, very straightforwardly cast iron, but a lot of them were meant to look like stone, and in fact, they were actually painted with a paint that had sand or gravel mixed into it, so that the surface texture of the building was more like stone than cast iron. And the upshot of that was that you couldn't tell with the naked eye which buildings were cast, in some cases, which were cast iron, which were stone. So Margot and her team adopted the expedient of carrying magnets with them as they walked around Soho. And that's kind of like a tour guide cliche to this day that I, myself, have never indulged in. Just say, okay.
Don't do it, because I'm a guy too. It ruined the magnetic stripe on my MetroCard. I had a magnet in my wallet, and it invalidated my phone.
All right. Let that be a warning to you all. That would upset me. Okay.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Again, I shoot lights in the dawn at Washington Square, and one of my favorite places to walk around, experience all the energy of the park. I think it has a different historical elements and stuff.
That's another one where the photo was almost more beautiful than the reality.
Well, I think a lot of it's, I don't think it's the photo, I think it's actually being at the right moment, the right time. Usually,
Did you line up the Empire State
Building? I think they probably designed it this way. But it's really trying to being in the right place and enjoying New York. I mean, with this book, what we try to do is kind of, everything's very accessible. Most of the places, you can go experience, you don't have to, on your own, you can walk around. And so it's kind of, the book was designed almost like a walk from lower Manhattan, to all the way uptown. So you kind of get a sense of walking through the city. So it's just really, New York, if you can go, I like the early mornings because I feel like the city belongs to me. So, you get away from the rush, and in the mornings the city's yours.
So what time did you take that?
Well, this is probably I'm not sure, it's probably around 5:30 in the morning.
Wow. Yeah.
It's still summertime, I mean.
That's why I can't be a photographer.
Yes, and sometimes not so glamorous. There's a lot of, again, this is showing the transformation of the city and stuff.
It's Frank Gehry on the left, the IAC building, Interactive Corporation. They own Match.com. And on the right is 111th Avenue, which is the Jean Nouvel building. A really interesting building where what looks like multicolored panes of glass actually acquire those colors because they're angled into the window frames differently, and they're catching the light at different angles. So it always looks like this vibrantly multicolored building. And Nouvel said that his inspiration was actually medieval stained glass, and I find that kind of interesting. That said, it leaks.
Anyway, this is what I ended up doing. I was walking along. This view is visible from the High Line, and about 6-7 years ago, that's when I was walking along the High Line. That's when I started taking photographs again of New York City. Felt like New York had kind of come out of its shell. It's opened up. And when I was looking at these buildings, walking along the High Line, then I always started working on a book called New York, which is really shooting everything that New York was built in New York in the last 10 years.
Francis, that Nouvel building, is that an apartment building?
Yes, it is.
Again, this is another different times of day and how the architecture and the structure of the building changes. This is the Whitney Museum. again, New York transforming itself. I mean, that used to be the total meatpacking district, and it's changed. And that's the Washington Square Arch and the student center of NYU. Library.
Well, library right here, books, library, and that's the student center.
Yeah.
Again, this is the highline. Now the thing is, now it's so crowded. It's hard to get a boat applied at it. It's become very successful, but and it's wonderful the way they viewed the tracks and planted between the. And this is looking down.
Okay, where were you?
This is from the Standard
oh,
Hotel.
oh, right,
There's
okay.
a nice bar up there.
From the what?
Standard Hotel.
Yeah.
Flatiron, one of my favorite buildings in the city. Say comment on it?
Great building. I mean, the thing about the Flatiron is it's one of the most photogenic buildings in the city. A few years ago, were you in that book? A book came out called Flatiron. This was about 1985 or so, which comprised nothing but photographs of the Flatiron building taken over the years, from the time the building was under construction, 1901, 02 is when it was under construction, to the present day. Some of the photographs, I mean, it was like a who's who. Not just the famous Stieglitz and Steichen photographs, but every great photographer who came. Henri Cartier-Bresson photographed the Flatiron building when he came to New York, and those were all in there, but then also a lot of anonymous photographs. And to this day, for all the thrills and spills you have in New York, whether it be the High Line or the naked women in Times Square that the mayor is so weirdly upset about, with all that you have in New York, isn't it still kind of an interesting and a marvelous thing? You go down to Madison Square, and there are 150 tourists at any time, day or night, photographing the Flatiron building. A building which, when it was built, people photographed because it was the very symbol of modernity. That people today photograph because it's so wonderfully old-fashioned.
The Empire State Building. I shoot a lot from a helicopter, so it's another different perspective on that part.
Probably late afternoon with the shadows.
This looks like a late afternoon. This is another looking straight down. It's one of my favorite buildings in the city. The UN building. This is early in the morning.
Wow.
This is St. Patrick's. It's just got renovated. I mean, just got the whole, it's worth going in. It just got cleaned up and finally.
Yeah, it really is worth going in. St. Patrick's will never be quite right because they keep it over-illuminated inside. They really need to take down the level of lighting dramatically in order for it to have the proper effect. But barring that change, which I don't think they're ever going to make because they don't want people like tripping stuff, it looks better now than it's looked in your lifetime. So it's really worth visiting.
That's Grand Central.
I mean, just think, what are you going to put right between two of the greatest buildings in New York, Grand Central Terminal and the Chrysler Building. What's just the thing to make for a graceful transition from one great building to another? The Grand Hyatt Hotel, right? The building which was,
Commodore.
which it replaced the Commodore, which did the job pretty well. At least it was a masonry building. But the Grand Hyatt is also notable, historically notable, as the building that introduced us to Donald Trump. It was his first project in Manhattan.
That's Renzo Piano kind of trying to create a new structure for the...
Yeah, when this museum opened, I wrote a 20,000-word essay. I did. Essay on it, which just tore it to pieces. I was so upset by what the Morgan had done. I just went, I made it sound like this was like the greatest calamity in the history of mankind. And then about 3 months later, I was in there, and it struck me, you know what? I actually kind of like it. And this is the tragic thing about architecture criticism. I guess any kind of criticism, you're supposed to render your judgment, and you do. And then later on, the same thing happened to me with Time Warner Center. I just tore it to pieces, and then like a week later, decided I kind of liked it.
What do you kind of like about this?
I think that it actually weaves the spaces together very well. It adds new
What about the one that was there
space.
before the Vinoli building? That was awful.
It did, but it didn't have didn't
That was
add to the
terrible.
yeah, right, the greenhouse thing.
No, it was terrible.
Yeah. Or let me put it this way. I don't hate it. It has terrible acoustics, by the way. I'm not talking about the concert hall downstairs, but they rent it out for parties. I've been to parties there, and it's horrible. I mean, the din, very, very bad acoustics. But apart from that, it has a great cafe. And isn't that what we're mostly interested in when we go to the museum? The Pierpont salad is delicious. Okay, sorry?
I said Friday night they played chamber music.
Oh, yes, yeah, chamber music.
By the restaurant.
Well, that made it opened it up, made it pedestrian friendly.
Yeah.
It's the library building.
Yeah. Great.
Will we ever see it again?
Right. I know the main reading room's closed right now for, seems like it should be open by now. But all kinds of weirdness at the New York Public Library. That said, if you're looking for a good book on the New York Public Library, I can recommend one.
Or it's a great place to work if you want to office someplace else, and if you like. I mean, I work in libraries all the time. They're great public spaces to enjoy and to if you want to get work done somewhere else. And the energy there is amazing.
It's 297 feet long, 3 feet short of a football field. And I just, I would love to see Peyton Manning throw a football across the delivery desk enclosure.
Or throw a book.
That's the outside. I swear.
That's fun.
But no naked ladies.
That's the mother photograph.
But
You like the old Times Square?
yeah, there's, what's that?
Well, they ever finish it? They're still
Finished.
working on it.
Times Square, yeah, I think it's
It
a
always changes.
permanent work in progress. And just what a curious thing Times Square is, sort of historically. It's gone through so many distinct phases in its history. And today, it is this, it's always been a touristy place, always. But the degree to which it is today is almost, you almost can't comprehend it. It's just amazing. Yeah. And for New Yorkers, I mean, there's nothing that defines a New Yorker more than his or her hatred of Times Square. You know, the lengths to which you go to avoid stepping in Times Square as though, you know, like, you know, you'll be tainted.
Museum Art and Art.
It's a terrible.
Terrible.
I think the new building is awful.
Oh, no, well, I thought you meant the photo.
No. No, the new building, what a waste of space.
Yeah, it's
Yeah, I mean, I love the old museum. I used to always, you know, drink coffee. It was quiet, it was smaller, but everything changes with the, you know.
And that's a tourist attraction.
What do you think of Tower Bird? Compared to the new
the one that
Yeah.
they're building next to it. Yeah, it's going to be big.
It's going to be bigger until they...
Right, yeah, they cut it down quite a bit.
What is that space
Absolutely.
called?
That's the garden.
Sculpture garden.
Yeah. That used to be a place to relax and come to the city and just spend every moment there an afternoon and just.
Yeah.
That's nice.
The 21 Club, which with the collection of lawn jockeys, 21 Club, it's, despite the name, it's just a restaurant, it's not a private club, but it has a very clubby atmosphere because a lot of the, you know, sort of like rich guys who eat lunch there do so regularly that it's almost like they're going to their club. And many of the regular patrons over the years at the 21 Club, which was actually a speakeasy at one time, and then evolved into this high-class restaurant, were owners of horse farms. And over the years, they donated the lawn jockeys that were associated with their horse farms so that they have this unusual collection. How many of you like this? Raise your hand. Okay. I'm just curious. Yeah, you get used to it. Who said that? Okay. Yeah, it's true. You do get used to things, don't you? But you know, this was a controversial building when it was built because the lower portion, which was designed by the Viennese stage designer Joseph Urban, was always meant as the base for a skyscraper, which wasn't built because they were cutting their losses at the time the stock market crashed. They figured at a later date we'll put the tower up, but they didn't think back circa 1930 that the tower was going to look like that. So this is an addition to the New York cityscape by Lord Foster.
Where is that building?
It's on,
8th and 56th.
yeah,
Where?
8th and 56th.
yeah. It's near 8th and 56th. It's near Columbus Circle. This is the Hearst Magazine building. By the way, the Good Housekeeping Institute is located in this building. I find that impressive.
It's a Lincoln Center. The fountain is the new fountain that they've built.
Comes on at different times or different heights.
Yeah.
Same people who did the Bellagio fountains.
Wet.
Yeah, wet water.
Yes.
type
Right.
or something like that.
Yeah.
It's Central Park. Again, it's like an oasis of heaven escape. I mean, originally, when this was built, I always liked there because you can almost feel like there's like castles. I mean, all the buildings that you used to see from the lake looked like the castle top. So you feel like this is a castle, so you kind of almost feel like you're in a transformed and magical land.
This is also at the crack of dawn.
No, this is actually Sunset Town.
Pretty.
Dakota. The Guggenheim. So I'm always trying to find different angles. This is, as walking by, I saw a reflection of a car roof. There's a pond over there, there's a car, so I'm always trying to find different ways of looking at the same thing. So.
That is cool.
This is looking up. It's one of my favorite buildings.
Did you place the car there?
No, I was looking at different ways of seeing the same thing if you can't find it.
Wow.
It's the Metropolitan. It's one of my favorite places. I try to pick a room and just get lost for a couple of hours.
This building, the branch bank of the Bank of the United States by Martin Thompson, which was built in 1824, stood right next to Federal Hall National Memorial on Wall Street, immediately to its right, once upon a time. And when it was demolished, the founder of the American wing at the Metropolitan, Robert DeForest, was responsible for saving the facade and re-erecting it in the museum. It's really a great thing.
How did you get it so empty?
Yeah, how did you get this so empty, Jake?
Just waiting for the right time. Wait, quiet moment.
He yelled fire, and then
I don't remember right now, but I do wait a long time. And,
They let you in after hours?
no, this is regular hours. Just you have to be patient.
Yeah.
This is,
Wow.
Oh, that's nice.
this is looking in the temple against the city and
are you in an apartment
an
building?
apartment building on Fifth Avenue. Love the Cleopatra needle back there.
I know that's fabulous.
That's a great view.
I mean, to have a shot with the Temple of Denver and the obelisk in it, that's, first of all, really unusual and just awesome.
This is St. John's Divine. It's one of my favorite places in New York to escape, and it's beautiful, quiet.
St. John's the Divine?
Yeah. Beautiful, quiet environment. Oh, I don't know if they'll ever finish it.
Never.
Yankee Stadium, new Yankee Stadium. Kind of miss the old stadium.
It's the place across the street.
Yeah, that's true. Agreed.
Is it dumb?
I like the old one better myself.
I go to 40 games a year. I despise, and every Yankee fan despises that place. In fact, the only thing we like about it, other than from the old days, the elevators, because you can get up and down quickly. You get out of it.
No, it's. I agree. I totally agree.
Yeah, I'm a Yankee fan too. I like Citi Field better.
Yeah.
Like the old, the new Mets Stadium I want.
Yeah, I agree.
Shout out.
I'm a Mets fan, and I think this is much superior.
Nope. It was
Well,
designed by the firm.
what is so objectionable about it? It looks like the old stadium. I've been there.
No, there's
There's
not
not much
inside. It's not as
overhang.
friendly. It says, oh yeah, it's
In the
nice.
outfield.
Yeah.
You're much
Too
further
far
away
back.
from the action.
Yeah.
It's actually tighter. They promise wider seats. It's actually tighter than the old stadium. And
And
on
then
and on.
there's also too much corporate.
So we're working our way up George Washington Bridge.
Now, the thing about the George Washington Bridge that people forget, the Brooklyn Bridge, as you all know, was the longest suspension bridge in the world when it was built. It eclipsed the previous record, which was the Roebling's Cincinnati-Covington Bridge, by about 50%. And that was very impressive. However, the George Washington Bridge was longer by a greater margin than any bridge ever was in history. Meaning, it more than doubled the length of any suspension bridge on the planet when it was built. That has never been done. It was never done before the George Washington. It hasn't been done since the George Washington. So when you're sort of toting up all of your New York wonders of the world, the George Washington Bridge is a top 5. It really is.
The longest suspension?
No, it's not the longest. But when it was built, it was more than twice as long as any other bridge in the world.
Okay.
Never happened before or since.
I think it gets more traffic across there than anywhere in the world today. More people go across it, more cars go across it than any other place in the world.
Jake, that photo almost looks like it's a mini waterfall. How did you get that effect?
Oh, here? It's just the way
Yeah,
I think the lights of the bridge were moving. And so it kind of reflection of water or thing like that.
Is that a little bit lighthouse?
Yes,
Yes,
right between
yes.
there, yes. Yes.
Yeah.
This is looking at Fort Trent in the winter time.
It's fabulous.
And that was it.
So we usually do some questions after. I actually have a question, so if I can start, then everyone else will take it. So Jake, you've been a photographer for decades. How has digital photography and Photoshop, and do you still use just analog photography, or do you use digital photography?
Yeah, I
Do you use
stopped
Photoshop?
doing analog about 8 years ago.
Okay.
Most of the time I use a program called Lightroom, which kind of helps you open up shadows. I think digital photography is amazing. Kind of makes me go back to the same places I photographed before. It opens. It's easier. You can do stuff quicker. But you used to never be able to shoot in the dark before, so you can now handhold things that are very dark. You can get images out of shadows that you were unable to. This photography now has gone through an explosion. It's much more better than it ever used to. I feel it's much better than it used to be.
How did you achieve that one of the first photos was the Statue of Liberty and then the Empire State Building?
That was.
Could you talk about how you did
Right.
that?
First it kind of. I was working on a different shot and I found that shot. It's a very long lens, so it's shooting almost like 2,000 millimeter lens. So it's one lens attached to another extenders. So you're really compressing a scene it's actually.
And
I'll show you something it's almost. Does this go forward at all, or?
And where were you when you shot
In
that?
Bayonne.
In Bayonne.
So you're like 5 miles away, so that distance you're able to. You'll kind of get an idea. Right, so you almost.
Yeah, it's the view from
So you're
Bayonne.
almost from the same spot, but this is over here. So it's moved over.
Yeah.
So I kind of draw as you kind of find the right angle. So you're just getting this smidge of this thing. And then this is the spot actually I go back where the Twin Towers used to be, right smack there.
Nick and I were in the office yesterday trying to figure out how he got that angle on Google Earth, trying to see if it was possible or if it was just like Photoshop, like putting Statue of Liberty in front of it.
Yeah, I try not to. I mean, only way this is Photoshop because there's a bunch of images, like sand stripped together. But I try not to really do too many special effects in my photography. I try to make it very accessible that anybody could really photograph it. Anybody could be there at that time.
Are the images of Brooklyn or Queens?
I have a book. Well, this book was just really mostly focused on Manhattan, but I do have a book.
It says New York City.
I know, it's true.
No, we do.
It's not enough.
Yeah, Brooklyn, all the boroughs are represented here.
Not enough.
I mean, not enough. It's true.
But this is a new edition.
And
But
Yankee
still-
The
Stadium.
cover was the one with
You
the
saw
Statue
Yankee
of Liberty,
Stadium.
the old one.
No,
Yeah.
it was a different. It was.
Statue of Liberty in the Empire State, that was the old cover.
Yes,
Now
yes.
this is a new one.
Yes,
This
yes.
is a new edition.
Yeah,
Just came out 2 months ago.
it could be, but we kind of had to limit it to certain. I have a book called New York City of Islands, which is actually a book that incorporates all the boroughs.
You've done a lot of books.
No, I
Big
don't
book.
Mhm.
So I've done, but this book, whenever you do a book, you kind of try there's a theme and there's a message. You always try not to. So this book we try to really pretty much mostly focus on Manhattan.
Any other questions? All right, well,
Okay, just a second. Can you think of any additions to buildings that really have been spectacularly successful? I mean, we don't really like MoMA. I've been up at the Guggenheim a lot, and I don't know. As you said before, you kind of make a peace with some of these. But I mean, could you name any that you thought really were just terrific additions to a landmark type building?
On East 95th Street, just off Fifth Avenue, there's a great house by Horace Trumbauer, the Marion Carhart House. And right next to it, a firm called Zivkovic Connolly designed really like a second house, which is attached to it. And the whole thing is like this, you know, very expensive luxury apartment thing called the Carhart Mansion. That's a spectacular addition, done with load-bearing limestone walls, which is very unusual in this day and age. I know that there are a lot of good additions. I'm just not thinking of them. Mott Schmidt designed an addition to Gracie Mansion. That was a really tough job. How do you build an addition to Gracie Mansion? This was in the 60s. He did the Susan B. Wagner wing, which is in the rear. And it's fabulous. I just think how today, if they wanted to build an addition to Gracie Mansion, they'd probably hire Norman Foster. And, you know, and it would be something like radically disjunctive.
John Hopkins done a good job adding like the Temple Doctor wing. They kind of managed to, keep expanding and kind of. I mean, also like the Rose Center, and
Rose?
I think that was a great addition to. Very different in the way they did it. The old and new. I happen to like the old and new juxtaposed.
Well, there's a whole, like the last time they added on to the Frick, not the proposed.
Oh, that's the best addition in the world. Yeah.
Which one is that?
The Frick Entry Pavilion by John Barrington Bailey from 1977. Perfect. Despite what Michael Kimmelman says.
But that was a period, so in other words, it's supposed to look like it was done a long time ago.
Yeah.
Great. Any last questions? All right. Well, we have the books here. It's actually been a bestseller of our bookstore in the last month. So hope you guys all pick it up. The authors will be here to be signing them, and we have wine. So we're gonna stick around for a little bit and take a look at the books. And thanks everyone for coming. And thank you. Thanks everyone for coming. Our director, Carol, could not be with us tonight. The museum is her passion, so she's upset that she couldn't come, but she'll be at the next one, our next book talk. It's been a series of different kind of guidebook book talks. For anyone who wasn't at the earlier ones this summer, you can watch them on our website on YouTube, but we had Seeking Europe with Tom Miller, who does a blog about different buildings around Manhattan and kind of the history and stories about the people who live there. And then we also had Andrew Dolkart, which is actually going to be on C-SPAN next weekend. We had a whole camera crew here for it, getting all the different angles. But he was talking about the Saving Place book, which is in conjunction with the exhibit for the 50th anniversary of the New York Landmarks, which is at the Museum of the City of New York. So tonight we have a book talk on New York City landmarks with Jake Roush and Francis Morrone. Is it Morone or Morone?
Morone.
Morone, sorry, Francis Morrone. So this has more than 70 photos of architecture from skyscrapers to bridges, churches, monuments, parks, and even the Skyscraper Museum made the entry in here. The book is a selection from over 300,000 photographs of New York City that Jake took in over 40 years as a photographer. So Jake moved to Brooklyn from Israel at the age of 8, and he says that New York City is his favorite place to photograph. Francis is an architectural historian, author, and critic. He also leads architectural walking tours of New York City. So I'll give it to Francis and Jake.